Did you develop any kind of fetish for it? Obviously from your posting and your talking and the message of the art is pretty clear. But I feel like it's easy to have an appreciation for the beauty of the object,
Yeah.
and the beauty of the machine. So is that, do you feel like that's developed in you? Like, do you feel like you have a greater appreciation for it, or a greater disdain for it? Or how do you feel now that
A little bit of both.
Yeah.
I mean, the art of the making, even just like the metal that they had to develop a very specific kind of blue metal to withstand the heat, just those kind of the design elements and the aesthetics of it, like on the old Smith and Wesson and Colts, you'll have these beautiful engravings. Then if you look at those engravings, they're like of Native Americans getting killed, or you know what I mean? So it's like, oh, right. So you might appreciate the beauty, but it reels you back in pretty quickly if you're really paying attention. I did a bunch of things after that particular works, which were a little more aggressive, or they were like gunshot wounds. I sort of wanted to remind myself what this stuff does, not just getting caught up in the thing, but what it does. And so that pulled me out of any appreciation aesthetically for the gun, the human toll.
What do you think is at the root of that gun fetish in our society that doesn't exist elsewhere?
Ooh, that's the trickiest part, I think. I think it has a lot to do with, well, in terms of power, right? This sort of relinquishing of basically a white male-centered power, right? I mean, that's the biggest thing probably. But then also something having to do with, and it's related, I think, how do we deal with our feelings, our emotions, like how do we solve problems that aren't just, I don't know, whip out my gun, you know what I mean? How do you solve a problem that is so caught up in one's sort of ideal of masculinity and power and violence? Violence is a tricky thing. I mean, you could say that it's something it's inbred in all of us to some degree, but we're sort of in a moment where slowly but surely we're trying to relinquish that part,
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's sort of all those things, the echo of all those things happening.
Sometimes it feels like to me, especially living abroad for a while, that Americans on any spectrum of politics are decidedly libertarian. And I always thought of myself as not. And then I came abroad and I met people that really weren't libertarian at all.
Oh, right.
And I realized just how fiercely, in some ways, like in some certain circumstances, I would say, fiercely libertarian I am. And even if it just comes down to the concept of like feeling entitled to argue with a police officer, like that kind of urge. And so I mean, does that resonate with you? Like, do you feel like that's part of, because I feel like the manifestation of that ultimately is, well, I need to protect my liberty. And right. Some of us feel that liberty threatened more than others, whether that's rational or not. And the ultimate way to do that is to arm yourself, right? And even if it's against an imaginary foe. So I don't know, that's where it sort of lies in my headspace at the moment, is in that libertarianism. And I was shocked when I moved abroad to find out how many moments I myself, who never considered myself to be that way, show up kind of in that way, like that. Yeah.
It's a weird sense of individualism that America has. You know what I mean? It's if you go even to Europe, let's say, their idea of individualism, if you think about existentialism as an individualist ideal, their version of it is still sort of like, we're in this together. Do you know what I mean? there's a greater sense of a responsibility to society or being a part of a community or civilization. If you don't like the word society, sometimes the word civilization works. But and in America, we don't seem to have that. And I think it's really deep in our psyche. We kind of came here on, I feel like, and Chris would probably have a more nuanced version of this, but we kind of came here on two different platforms. We had the Puritans who came here, self-professed, ostracized. They came here and they were sort of alone in this world, so they had to, that's that individualist kind of sensibility in there, the Puritan sensibility. But then there's also the sort of capitalist, the never do well, I'm going to go to America and make my fortune kind of a thing. And that fortune happens to be something that's gotten, if you're an individualist, apparently, right? Not through the hard work of lots of slavery. You know what I mean? So like things get really messy, but I think those are two really distinct but important tracks that are embedded in our history.
Yeah.
And why
I agree very much. And just the I don't think that you're wrong that Americans are pretty libertarian, and it's a shock when you enter into a society that's not that way. But there are different ways of handling that, and we've chosen a fear-based one. That we fear that people are going to take things from us, and therefore we need to harm them in order to do so. It doesn't have to be that way. You can approach others not afraid of them, and you can still say, these are my, I expect that I'm going to be treated in a certain way without having to kill somebody in order to protect that.
It's a very extreme reaction to your individualism, right? I mean, like to kill. Rather than to just, I have a list of people ask me, what happens if somebody breaks into my house? Well, I've made a whole list. You can get an alarm, you can get a dog, you can run, you can hide, you can call somebody. I mean, there's just like a giant list of things that you can do instead of kill them first. You know what I mean? Like even if you have to get, even a knife is a little less. You know what I mean? Like the thing with knives is that you have to get in there and physical, so most people aren't going to do killing with knives. Not that it doesn't happen, obviously, but I think it's a better warning than, say, using a gun, which is an ultimatum in a way. But there's a whole host of other things you can do before you use a gun, I think. We go for
if we were more
go ahead. If we were more what?
If we were more caring as a society, then if somebody broke into your house, you could just let them have whatever they wanted, and you could just get it replaced. Like we could take care of each other.
Right. Well, but everybody's under the impression that they're not coming in to take your TV, which is if they're coming in at all. Who's targeting you? You think,
That's
right?
exactly
Really,
right.
I don't understand that mentality. But anyway, let's just say that it happens. I do happen to have a friend who, while he was out, he had surveillance cameras, which is among the things on my list. Who caught these guys break into his house, but they weren't coming in to kill him. They were taking stuff out of the house. So, I mean, that's one thing you can do. Let them have it.
Not escalate. Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that's really, I think, propagated out of this conversation is this perception. Like, I think when you were putting it in an interesting way, where you're like, if they're breaking into your house, if they're coming to kill you, which is like to say that the average American isn't experiencing that super often. Right. But the perception is not that, in my experience anyway, hearing other people's views of America based on what they hear about it, they take that very, they have that sense that everyone in America has guns, everybody. And I'm often finding myself reminding people, like, I don't know anyone. Like, my uncle has some, I think that's almost the end of the list. Like there's almost no one I know that has guns, and it's been that way my whole life. And so, and that's like confusing for them to disabuse them of that idea that like every American's got a number of guns and they're already training their kids to use them, or that we're constantly experiencing crime, and that if they come, they will experience crime. Right. And so, that perception is tough, because I think in some ways it's true, and it's super important that those issues be discussed, but the way it's being perceived is I think right now, the debate, the debate of not hypotheticals, but of instances, is just being taken as like day-to-day, minute-by-minute life. And then again, that paranoid feeling that you're talking about, where you're like, well, I better get a gun because someone is gonna break into my house and try to kill me. That part is, I don't know, like I think that is what's translated out of this conversation sometimes.
Yeah, I get those students too. They just got to America, they're in New York City. New York City, it's funny to say, and they think everybody's got a gun, and they've got to be they're usually kind of afraid. I had one student who was like, I'm a little afraid. I'm like, why? Because there's a lot of gun, I mean, it sounds like there are with the media and everything, and they're atrocious when they happen, but it's like it's happening. It's like the OK Corral on every corner, which it's not.
Yeah. Well, interestingly, I was in New York City visiting about 2 years ago, and it was winter time. I flew in from Singapore, and so I'm kind of bundled up. I'm wearing this coat that I have still from high school. It's old, and it's kind of beat up. So I have this big coat on. I got this like kind of scully cap on, and I got my glasses on, and I'm waiting to meet a friend, and I'm on, maybe like around 32nd on the west side of Manhattan, just kind of busy area. And I'm just leaning up against a wall, kind of cold and waiting. And this young girl walks up to me, and she's probably about 22. She's by herself, and she's a tourist. And she says, would you take my picture? And she hands me her cell phone without even a second thought.
Yeah.
And so I took it and I ran. No, I'm just joking. But I no, but I took her picture. Yeah, I was like, I can't believe I just lucked out like that. Oh my god, best day. But I handed it back to her. But I thought, my god, that never would have happened when I was a kid, because you were taught like, okay, you go into New York, you watch your back, you don't go to this area, you don't go to that area. And it was very, it was dicey, right? Like you could find yourself in a wrong situation. And that, I think New York has changed a lot in that way. It's demonstrably safer in many ways. And so, that was a sign to me, like, oh, the word is getting out that there's a little bit more trust, or block is that kind of compact, or that kind of contract that you were talking about, where you said, well, I can expect other human beings to treat me or deal with me in a certain way. So she just handed me her phone and said, okay, this will be fine. And it was. But that was like a shock to me, because growing up in that area, I grew up in New Jersey, and it was just, you were taught, like, be careful.
Yeah, I remember those days too. I mean, even just seeing pictures of New York City was very different, small, lots of smog, and it was a dangerous place. I remember hearing stories from other people. They would go to the subway. There's one story, I forget who told me this, that he had a cup of coffee, he was in the subway waiting for it, and some guy came up to him and just took the coffee and gave him like a threatening look and walked away. That was it.
Power move.
I'm like, that's New York in the 70s and 80s. Yep.
I feel like there's like a 90% chance that guy was just like auditioning for like a villain role in a movie and was like, I need to practice today.
Right. Now it sounds like a Dada thing. It sounds like a performance thing. Somebody was taking video of the whole thing.
Exactly. Yeah.